A young black boy stood up and interrupted a judge mid-hearing. What he said left the judge visibly shaken, and the entire courtroom stunned into silence. Though the room had gone quiet, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Every gaze turned toward the 12-year-old boy, who, with an unexpected burst of bravery, dared to speak out in the middle of the proceedings. He uttered just 2 words, words so powerful that the most commanding figure in the courtroom turned pale, as though he had seen a ghost. But who was this boy? Why did his words strike such a chord? What kind of life had he endured to reach that very moment? What initially appeared to be a routine hearing soon revealed a haunting truth. This was the story of Matus, a child who had survived a life of abuse and neglect at the hands of his adoptive parents, a story that peeled back the facade of a seemingly perfect home to expose its darkest corners. Behind the walls of what looked like a peaceful household, there were muffled cries, violence masked as discipline, and a suffering that no child should ever have to bear. Before we dive deeper into this emotional and eye-opening account, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps raise awareness and fight injustice. Matus was a quiet child who rarely met anyone's eyes. At school, teachers noticed that he often appeared exhausted and distant, but it was his teacher, Carla, with her intuitive and watchful nature, who picked up on the signs that others missed. His clothes were always oversized, likely to conceal bruises. His eyes darted away whenever someone brought up his home life, and he always had well-rehearsed excuses for small injuries. Matus lived with his adoptive parents, Rario and Patricia. To neighbors, they seemed like the ideal couple, always cheerful and active. Velai involved in community events, but behind closed doors, a very different reality unfolded. Rario was strict to the point of tyranny, prone to fits of rage that made Matus flinch with fear. Patricia, though less physically violent, wielded her words like weapons, slowly chipping away at the boy's confidence. "You should feel lucky," she would say coldly, pushing a plain plate of food toward him. "If it weren't for us, you'd be living on the streets." Rario, for his part, controlled every aspect of Matus's life, claiming he was raising him to be a real man. But in truth, all he instilled was fear. Whenever Matus made small mistakes, like forgetting to wash the dishes, Rario would punish him harshly, always making sure the marks remained hidden. One seemingly normal morning, Carla decided enough was enough. During a group activity, Matus became distracted, and his shirt lifted slightly, revealing a purplish bruise on his back, which he quickly tried to hide. Carla said nothing in the moment, but after class, she gently asked him to stay behind. "Matus, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft and filled with concern. The boy shook his head and attempted a weak smile. "Yes, teacher, I'm fine." But Carla could tell he wasn't. It was the same hollow response she had heard before from other children who were suffering in silence. Determined to help, she started asking questions. She reached out to other teachers who echoed her concerns about Matus's withdrawn behavior, and she brought the matter to the school's social worker. Meanwhile, things were growing more strained in the Rario-Patricia household. Patricia began noticing that Matus had become quieter than usual, as though he were hiding something. "Don't you think he's been acting odd lately?" she asked Rario over dinner. "He's just a kid," Rario replied dismissively. Still, her words made an impression, and he began watching Matus more closely. At school, Carla continued urging Matus to open up about what he was going through. Initially, he denied anything was wrong, insisting everything was fine. But over time, he started to trust her, revealing bits and pieces of his reality. "They don't like me," Matus said one day, twirling a pencil nervously in his hands. He pretended everything was fine whenever others were around. Carla knew she had to act quickly, so she began documenting every detail Matus shared and every warning sign she noticed. She sought support within the school and notified the appropriate authorities. Meanwhile, Rario and Patricia began sensing that something was amiss. One day, Rario caught Matus scribbling in a notebook and abruptly snatched the paper from his hands. It turned out to be a school essay where Matus described an invisible monster that ruled his life. Enraged, Rario was ready to lash out, but Patricia urged him to stay composed. "If we react now, we'll raise suspicion," she warned. "Let him believe he's still in control." What they didn't know was that Matus had already made up his mind to resist. Inspired by Carla's encouragement, he started gathering evidence of everything happening at home. He recorded conversations, took pictures of the bruises on his body, and carefully hid it all in a secure place. Carla, on her part, compiled all of the information and delivered it to the authorities. That's how the case made its way to court, where the truth would finally come to light. The courtroom was filled to capacity that morning, every seat taken by spectators, attorneys, social workers, and even journalists. The case of Matus, the boy who dared to confront his abusive adoptive parents, had captivated the city. Yet despite all the attention, Matus sat on the bench with his stomach in knots, waiting beside his teacher Carla and the lawyer assigned to represent him. Across the room, Rario and Patricia appeared polished and poised, flashing warm smiles at the jurors, nodding at familiar faces, and whispering quietly to each other with the air of a united front. To the casual observer, they looked like ideal parents. But Matus knew the truth, and this was his moment to reveal it. The judge entered with an air of authority, instantly commanding silence. He was a stern-looking man in middle age, with a rigid posture and eyes that missed nothing. He called the hearing to order, and the defense attorney representing Rario and Patricia was first to speak. "Your Honor," he began, "my clients, Rario and Patricia, exemplify compassion and generosity. They opened their home and their hearts to a boy in need. Sadly, this child, scarred by a troubled past, has fabricated stories to sabotage the only family willing to care for him." His argument was smooth and well-rehearsed, but each word struck Matus like a knife. He turned to Carla, who gently squeezed his hand and whispered, "Stay strong. The truth is on our side." Rario was the first to testify. He fixed his gaze on the judge, wearing the expression of someone ready to share a touching personal story. "Adopting Matus was an act of love," he began, his voice soft and dripping with false sincerity. "From the beginning, we knew it wouldn't be easy. He came from a chaotic home and needed extensive care. We did everything, therapy, tutoring, but he never let us in." When Patricia took the stand, she followed the same strategy. She faked tears, claimed she loved Matus like her own son, and portrayed him as difficult, saying all they ever wanted was to help him move past his trauma. On the other side of the room, Matus sat, heavy-hearted. Their testimony was so convincing that for a moment he feared no one would believe his truth. But when Carla's lawyer stood, the mood began to shift. "Your Honor," the lawyer said resolutely, "today we will reveal a very different story, one of abuse, manipulation, and deep neglect. The evidence we present will expose the reality behind this couple's public image." Then came the pivotal moment. Matus was called to the witness stand. He walked slowly, his legs feeling like they were weighed down by cement. As he sat, he scanned the courtroom, the serious expressions of the jurors, Rario's icy stare, and Carla's reassuring eyes. "Matus," the lawyer asked gently, "what would you like to say to the court?" Matus took a deep breath. "They're liars," he said, his voice trembling yet determined. "They act like good people, but at home, they treat me like garbage." A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised his hand to restore order. "Go ahead, Matus," the lawyer prompted with care. Matus began recounting his experience, the yelling, the punishments, the cruel words that chipped away at his self-worth. He spoke about the time Rario slammed him against a wall for not cleaning properly. Then, with shaking hands, he presented the recordings he had made. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the voices of Rario and Patricia echoed from the speakers. "You think anyone's going to believe you, kid?" Rario's voice rang out. "You're just dead weight. If it weren't for the money we get, we wouldn't even keep you around." The evidence hit like a thunderclap. Each audio clip, every photo of bruises, and financial records showing how the adoption funds were misused, all were shown to the court. The polished image Rario and Patricia had built began to unravel, yet the most powerful moment was still to come. Patricia sat frozen, as if her entire performance had vanished into thin air. Rario, in contrast, seethed with rage, his calm facade shattered. He leaned forward in his chair and shot a threatening glare at Matus, but Matus didn't look away. He kept his chin up, knowing that this was the moment he had to be his bravest. "Your Honor, I would like to call the next witness," announced Matus's lawyer. Every eye turned toward Carla, who rose from her seat and walked confidently to the stand. Once seated, the questioning began. "Miss Carla," the lawyer asked, "as Matus's teacher, what led you to suspect he was in an abusive situation?" Carla adjusted her glasses and took a steady breath. "I observe my students closely every day, Your Honor," she replied. "With Matus, it was clear something wasn't right. He constantly appeared tired, had difficulty focusing, and frequently came to school with unexplained marks. But what troubled me most was how he responded whenever we discussed family. He would tense up and shut down. The lawyer nodded. "And that's when you chose to intervene?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "I worked to earn his trust. I asked him about home, but he was too afraid to speak at first. Eventually, he opened up. That's when I decided to report everything to the school board." "And during that time," the lawyer continued, "did you observe anything else of concern?" Carla hesitated briefly before answering. "Yes. Whenever Matus missed school or arrived late, he seemed even more withdrawn than before. He even confided in me that his adoptive parents were using the money meant for his care to indulge in luxuries, while he often went hungry or had to wear tattered clothing. I knew I had to step in, though I also realized it wouldn't be easy. That's when I suggested he begin gathering evidence." The lawyer turned toward the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "I would like to submit Ms. Carla's statement, along with the previously presented records, as evidence that Matus's living situation was clearly abusive and neglectful." The judge nodded, his expression solemn. "The evidence is accepted." At that moment, the tension in the room was almost unbearable. Every word spoken carried incredible weight. Matus's story was unfolding with devastating clarity, unraveling the careful illusion that Rario and Patricia had built. But the defense lawyer wasn't finished yet. "Your Honor," he said, rising abruptly, "with all due respect, we must consider the possibility that Matus is exaggerating or even fabricating these claims. After all, he's just a child, while my clients have a spotless history with the adoption system." The judge raised a curious eyebrow, but before he could respond, Matus stood up suddenly, his heart racing. All eyes turned to him. "Mr. Matus," the judge said, surprised, "do you have something to add?" Matus felt the weight of every gaze in the courtroom, but with courage built from countless sleepless nights, he stepped forward and said, his voice steady, "They don't see me as a son. To them, I'm just a bank account." A hushed gasp moved through the room. Matus's words were simple, direct, but they landed like a blow to everyone listening. "Ning!" Rario slammed his hand on the table and began to rise, but a security guard quickly stopped him. The judge raised his hand again to restore silence, then looked Matus directly in the eye. "You are a very brave young man. Please, continue." Matus drew in a deep breath and went on. "I may be just a kid, but I know the difference between love and greed, and what they gave me wasn't love. They lie, they scream, they hurt, they only act like good people when someone's watching. Everything they've done was just to fool others and keep collecting money meant for me." At this point, Liam, Matus's best friend, was called to the stand. He testified about the times he had seen Matus with visible injuries, how Matus had confided in him about what happened at home, and how he had encouraged him to talk to Carla. "Matus is strong," Liam said, "but he shouldn't have to be. He just wants to be treated like a normal kid, and they never gave him that." With every new witness and piece of evidence, Rario and Patricia became increasingly tense. The truth was now being laid bare, and they could no longer hide behind their polished facade. When the judge called a recess to deliberate, Matus felt the air grow lighter around him. He returned to his seat beside Carla and Liam, both of whom greeted him with reassuring smiles. Though his nerves hadn't faded, he knew in his heart that he had done the right thing. The matter now rested in the hands of justice. When the judge returned after the break, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Everyone in the room held their breath, waiting for the verdict. Matus kept his eyes on the judge, his hand resting on Carla's shoulder for comfort. Rario and Patricia, on the other hand, had gone pale, their earlier confidence drained away. The judge adjusted his glasses and glanced at Matus before speaking. His tone was firm, but carried a hint of compassion. After thoroughly reviewing the evidence presented, including the testimonies of Matus, Ms. Carla, Liam, and others involved, as well as the audio recordings and financial documentation, this court finds that Mr. Rario and Ms. Patricia acted in a manner that was not only negligent and abusive, but also fraudulent in their treatment of Matus. He paused, letting the impact of his words sink in before continuing. "Your actions betrayed the trust placed in you by the foster care system, and more importantly, violated the basic rights of a child who should have been loved and protected under your care." The judge then turned directly to the defendants. "Rario and Patricia, your behavior is not just morally indefensible, it is criminal. You failed not only as guardians, but exploited a vulnerable child for personal gain. Therefore, I hereby revoke your guardianship immediately and permanently, terminate all parental rights to Matus." He continued, "Furthermore, the financial evidence shows clear abuse of public funds designated for the care of foster children. Mr. Rario, you are to be arrested for financial fraud and child abuse. Bailiffs, take him into custody." 2 officers approached as Rario began shouting, "This is outrageous! It's all lies!" But his voice was drowned out as the handcuffs clicked shut and the guards led him from the courtroom. Patricia broke down in tears, but the judge remained unmoved. As for Ms. Patros, "I see, he said, though you were not the primary party responsible for the financial misconduct, your willful ignorance and negligence enabled the abuse. You will be subject to a full investigation, and you are hereby barred from ever serving as a guardian to any child again. This court finds your actions equally serious and unacceptable." Patricia wept openly, but no one in the room showed her sympathy. Matus watched it all unfold, feeling a mix of emotion and relief. For the first time, he felt truly heard. The judge then turned his attention to the boy. "Matus," he said gently, "your bravery in telling your story is nothing short of remarkable. Your strength and perseverance are admirable. This court not only believes you, but is committed to ensuring that you are placed in a safe and loving environment." He paused, then added, "I understand this is a major change, but I hope you see it as the beginning of a new chapter. One where you will finally receive the care and respect every child deserves." Carla squeezed Matus's shoulder and whispered, "You did it. We're all so proud of you." The judge then turned to her. "Professor Carla, your unwavering dedication to Matus and your courage in bringing the truth forward were extraordinary. The system needs more people like you. I'm certain Matus will always be grateful for your support." Carla, her voice emotional, responded, "Your Honor, it was Matus who showed true courage. I simply did what any adult should." The court adjourned, but for Matus, a new life was just beginning. In the days that followed, Matus was temporarily placed under Carla's care while legal arrangements were finalized. Carla and her family welcomed him into their home, not just with shelter, but with warmth and belonging. On his first night there, Matus sat down to a dinner unlike any he'd ever had, a table full of dishes he had never dreamed of tasting, surrounded by people who treated him like family. Afterward, Carla led him to his new room, a modest but cozy space with a soft bed, a shelf full of books, and even a whiteboard where he could draw or write freely. Matus stood at the doorway, taking it all in, so different from everything he had known. Carla noticed his hesitation and smiled gently. "This is your home now, Matus. You're safe here, and you're cared for." Slowly, Matus began to heal. Over time, he learned to trust again, to smile without fear, and even to imagine a future filled with hope. He began thriving in school, supported by Carla and his new classmates. The courage he showed in standing up to his abusers became an inspiration to others facing their own silent battles. Years later, Matus stood proudly on stage at his graduation, ready to receive his diploma. Looking out into the crowd, he saw Carla and her family standing and applauding with pride. He paused, took a deep breath, and stepped up to the microphone. "A few years ago, I thought life would never change, that no one would hear me or believe me, but because of people who truly cared, I was not only rescued, I was given a second chance. Today, I dedicate this moment to them and to every child still waiting for someone to speak up for them. Never stop believing that things can get better." The audience rose in a standing ovation. As Matus stepped down from the stage, he knew that his journey, though filled with pain, had shaped him into someone stronger, wiser, and full of purpose. And so, a story that began with cruelty and injustice ended in hope, and the bright promise of a better tomorrow. If this story touched you, please like the video, leave a comment, and share it with others. Stories like this remind us why the fight for justice, compassion, and humanity must never stop. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that inspire change.